The hand pressed flat against Louisiana mud at 0347 hours. Not hiding, not cowering, just pressed flat the way a stone is flat, the way the ground itself is flat, because that is what the ground does, and that is what the man had become. 8 pairs of boots moved around him in the darkness. Not around him exactly, through the space where a man should not be, where no one had thought to look, where the map said nothing lived. The closest set of boots stopped 14 inches from his right ear. He did not breathe. He did not think about breathing. He thought about the mud, the weight of it, the temperature of it, which was almost exactly the temperature of his skin after 4 hours pressed against the earth. He thought about how the mud smelled like pine resin and old rain and iron, and how it held him the way water holds a stone dropped gently enough that it does not sink but rests. The boots shifted. A flashlight beam swept left, swept right, caught the trunk of a long-leaf pine 12 feet away, and held there for 2 seconds that lasted longer than most minutes he had lived. Then the boots moved on. 7 more pairs followed, voices low and professional. One man said something about the grid. Another answered. Their words dissolved into the night before they reached him. He stayed still for 4 more minutes after the last sound faded. Then he allowed himself one slow breath. His name was Garrett Cole. He was 35 years old. He had been in this exact piece of ground since 2340 hours, and it was now 0347, 4 hours and 7 minutes of Louisiana darkness with his face in the mud, and the 8 men who had just walked over him had no idea he existed. That was not an accident. Nothing about this night was an accident. 47 hours earlier, Fort Polk, Louisiana. The briefing room had no windows. That was the first thing Cole noticed. Not the man sitting across the table, not the single manila folder between them, not the absence of a recording device that should have been standard for any official brief. The windows. There were none. Just cinder block painted the color of old teeth and fluorescent light that made everything look like evidence. The man had no name on his uniform. Not a blank name tape, no name tape at all. His rank was colonel, 2 silver eagles catching the bad light. But colonels have names, and this one had chosen not to wear his. He pushed the folder across the table without preamble. Cole opened it. Page 1, a list of 4 names, his own at the top. Below it, Beaumont Reyes Park. No unit designations, no rank, just names. Page 2, a map of the JRTC training area. Joint Readiness Training Center. 700 square miles of Louisiana pine forest and swamp and ground that punished careless men. 3 positions circled in red ink. No labels, no coordinates written out. Just circles, the way a child circles things in a picture book. Except that children do not circle positions in military training areas without reason. Cole turned to page 3. The page had been torn out. Cleanly. The ragged edge ran along the spine where the staple had been. He looked up. The colonel met his eyes without expression. The face was 50 years old and had been lived in hard. The kind of face that has been wet and cold and hot and scared and controlled itself through all of it until controlling became the only expression left. Exercise Phantom Fury, the colonel said. Up for roll. Standard recon and report. 40 hours, no direct engagement, no communications outside your team. Cole looked at the torn edge where page 3 had been. Standard. Yes. The 3 positions, identified on the map. No labels. You'll find the labels when you find the positions. Cole set the folder down. He looked at the map again, at the 3 red circles arranged not in a line but in a loose triangle that corresponded to no obvious tactical feature. Not a command post, not a weapons cache, not a perimeter anchor point. Something else. Burn that before you leave the room, the colonel said. He stood, adjusted his blouse, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob but did not turn around. Cole, sir, don't find them fast. Find them right. The door opened and closed, and the fluorescent light buzzed, and Cole sat alone with the map for 30 seconds. Then he picked up the pencil he had been given to take notes with. He turned his left hand palm down on the table. He pressed 3 sets of coordinates into the skin on the back of his hand in small, careful numerals, pressing hard enough that the indentations would outlast sweat and Louisiana humidity for 2 days if he needed them to. He folded the folder twice, held the corner to the fluorescent tube until it caught, dropped it in the metal waste can, and watched it finish. Walked out. They met at waypoint 7 at 2200 hours. No lights, no radio check. The briefing had been clear on that. They arrived from separate directions because That was how they had been trained, and because old habits do not require instruction. Beaumont came first, which was not what Cole expected, because Beaumont always arrived exactly when he said he would, and Cole had said 2,200, and it was 2,157. But Beaumont was already there, had been there, it turned out, since 2140. He came out of the shadows between two longleaf pines, and Cole did not hear him move until he was 8 feet away. That was closer than most men could manage. Cole himself could usually manage 6 feet in ideal conditions. He filed the information and said nothing. Staff Sergeant Darian Beaumont was 33 years old and had grown up in the wetlands southwest of Lafayette, where his grandmother had taught him that the bayou notices everything and forgives nothing. He was not a large man. He had the kind of quiet that filled the space around him without making demands on it. His hands were still. Cole had never once seen his hands do anything they were not supposed to do. "Anything on your approach?" Cole asked. "Camera in the oak at grid Delta 7, passive infrared." Beaumont's voice was lower than conversation level, but not whispered. Whispering carries differently than low speech. Beginners do not know this. I went around it, 40 meters added. They'll have the gap mapped. They have the gap mapped, but they mapped it as animal traffic. Wrong height for a man moving upright. Beaumont paused. "I was not moving upright." Cole nodded. That was sufficient. Park arrived 7 minutes later, and he did not come from the direction Cole had assigned him. Calvin Park was 28 years old and had spent 4 years before enlisting as an electrical engineer for a firm in Charlotte that built cellular infrastructure in mountainous terrain. He understood dead space and signal propagation the way other men understood weather. He could look at a ridgeline and tell you where the invisible holes were, where a signal simply ceased to exist, where something could hide inside the gap between transmission and reception. He applied this thinking to terrain with results that were, in Cole's experience, genuinely unsettling. "You came from the east," Cole said. "Dead ground along the drainage channel." Park spoke with the flat precision of a man who prefers data to narrative. 15-degree depression runs about 220 meters before it closes. No line of sight from any of the 3 observation posts I identified on my approach. I went through it twice to confirm. Twice. I wanted to know if it was reliably dead or situationally dead. Cole thought about this. Which is it? Reliably dead, the drainage angles away from the main perimeter. Even with repositioned OPs, they'd have to physically enter the channel to observe it. He paused. "No one will choose it. It's wet and slow and the brush is nasty." "Good," Cole said. And he meant it the way a carpenter means it when he finds exactly the right piece of wood. Reyes arrived at 2200 exactly, which was the time Cole had specified, and he came from the correct direction, and he hit the waypoint within 2 meters of the marked position. His breathing was audible from 12 feet. Danny Reyes was 22 years old and had grown up in San Antonio, in a house where his father left before 5 in the morning, 6 days a week to drive 18-wheelers across West Texas, and came home smelling like diesel and distance. His father had never been military. No one in his family had been military. When Reyes had told his father he was enlisting, his father had set down his fork and looked at him for a long time, and then picked his fork back up and continued eating. At the end of the meal, he had cleared his plate and washed it and dried it and placed it in the cabinet. Then he had put his hand on his son's shoulder without saying anything at all. Reyes had understood. He was still working out whether he understood correctly. He was wiry in the way that young men who have worked hard physical jobs are wiry, muscle without excess, and he moved with the natural agility of someone who had spent years climbing things not designed to be climbed. He was fast, he was smart, he was afraid, which was appropriate, and he had not yet learned to make his fear work for him instead of against him, which was appropriate also, because that was a thing that took time and could not be taught in a classroom. His breathing was audible from 12 feet, and Cole let him settle before speaking. "Your breath," Cole said quietly, "is a radio signal." Reyes looked at him. "It tells anyone within 20 meters that something warm-blooded is having a physiological response to stress. Turn it off." "How?" It was not a question, exactly. It was the tone of someone who genuinely does not know and genuinely wants to. Cole looked at him for a moment, then, "Breathe like the ground breathes. Deep and slow, not because you need to, but because you choose to. Your body is just a loud animal you are responsible for. You are in charge of it, not the other way around." Reyes said nothing, but something in his posture shifted, some small degree of surrender leaving him. replaced by a kind of deliberate settling. Cole looked at all three of them, Beaumont still, Park already studying the tree line to the northeast. Reyes working on his breathing. 4 of us, Cole said, 40 hours. No radio outside this team. We find the 3 positions. We document everything. We come home clean. He paused. The objective is not to avoid being caught. The objective is to never be a thing that needs catching. We do not run. We do not hide. We become the ground. He glanced briefly at his hand, at the indentations there. These coordinates are positions with no labels. We find out what they are when we get there. Beaumont said, someone wanted us to find those positions without documentation. Cole held the question for a moment. We'll find out when we get there. He was not certain this was true, but it was the only answer available, and in the absence of better answers, movement was the correct response. We go to ground at 23:30, he said. We observe until we know the pattern. Every patrol rotation, every sentry habit, every radio check, every smoke break, every moment someone is tired enough to forget they're being watched. He looked at the tree line. We do not move until we know them better than they know themselves. He turned toward the dark. Stay behind your heartbeat. The perimeter of the 75th Ranger Regiment's exercise command post had been designed by a man who did not make casual decisions about defense. Colonel Raymond Decker was 47 years old. He had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in the Gulf, and had survived all 3 through a combination of tactical intelligence and what his soldiers called controlled paranoia, which was not paranoia at all, but a trained refusal to accept the world as safer than it was. He built perimeters the way engineers build bridges, with redundancy as the primary virtue. If one thing failed, the next thing held. Failure was designed into the system so that no single failure could be catastrophic. His command post sat on a slight rise in the training area, surrounded by a triple overlap observation network he had laid out himself. 3 observation posts at variable distances, not uniform. Camera coverage in the gaps. A patrol rotation on randomized intervals, not fixed, not predictable, because fixed intervals are habits, and habits are defeats waiting to happen. And then there was Howell. Sergeant First Class Marcus Howell was 38 years old and had grown up hunting whitetail in the hill country of central Texas, and had brought to the Army a tracker's eye that no classroom had produced and no classroom could replicate. He saw ground the way a musician hears music, not as a collection of individual notes, but as a structure, a pattern, a shape made by the relationship between elements. Decker had placed Howell at a position that did not appear on the official observation post schematic. He had walked it with him at last light and explained the sightlines. Only 2 men in the compound knew Howell was there. The position covered a sector Decker considered the most likely approach for a capable OPFOR element, because it was the sector that looked from the outside like the least likely approach. Capable enemies do not come from obvious directions. The terrain there was broken and low, a series of shallow depressions running southeast, the kind of ground that looks slow and miserable and not worth the effort. Capable enemies understand that slow and miserable is an advantage. Decker did not know the names of the 4 men outside his perimeter. He had been given a brief that described them as an OPFOR SFODA element, Special Forces Operational Detachment Alpha, men who had spent years being trained to be ghosts in other people's terrain. He had 2 days to find them. He was not anxious about this. He was interested. 2,340 hours. The 4 men went to ground. Cole chose the position himself after 20 minutes of slow observation from a tree line 200 meters out. He was not looking for the closest approach or the fastest route. He was looking for a piece of ground that would accept them without argument, ground that already had a shape that 4 bodies could fill without changing. He found it in a slight depression behind a cluster of saw palmetto, slightly lower than the surrounding terrain, invisible from 3 of the 4 approach vectors, offering partial concealment toward the command post without relying on vegetation alone. The vegetation was supplementary. The depression itself was the thing. Dead ground. They settled in without speaking. 4 men finding their positions in total darkness, with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this enough times that the body knows what the mind is still working out. Cole lay on his left side, slight angle toward the command post, face behind a screen of palmetto frond he had not moved or adjusted. Park went to the rear, slightly offset right, watching the arc that no one would think to watch because it was behind them and the threat was in front of them. This was the arc where threats most often came from in Cole's experience because everyone else was watching the front. Beaumont positioned himself to Cole's left, far enough that a single flashlight beam could not catch both of them, close enough that a touch signal system worked. Reyes settled beside Cole, close enough for the touch system. Cole could hear the boy's heartbeat slowing. Then they waited. This is the part people do not understand. They understand action. They understand speed and noise and the mechanics of violence. They have seen enough movies and read enough books to construct a passable mental model of a firefight or an assault or a raid. They do not understand this. This is not the absence of action. This is action at a different frequency, below what most people's senses are calibrated to detect. Every minute of stillness is a decision. Every decision is a cost. The body wants to move. The body has 10,000 years of evolutionary engineering dedicated to the proposition that stillness means death and movement means survival. And every neuron and hormone and reflex is aligned against you, and you are in charge, and you are telling the body no. Not yet. Not until I say. Cole lay still and listened to the command post. It had a rhythm. All human spaces have rhythms because humans are rhythmic creatures, habitual in ways they do not recognize. The sentry rotation was 92 minutes. He counted 2 full rotations before he accepted this. The second rotation ran 91 minutes, which told him the variance was 1 minute, which told him the rotation was a clock habit, not a judgment habit. Men with judgment habits vary more. Men with clock habits do not. The radio checks came every 40 minutes from a position he pegged at the northeast corner of the main structure. The operator had a slight delay between transmission and response, about 2 seconds longer than standard, which meant the radio was set to a frequency with mild atmospheric interference, which meant they were not on the primary JTAC coordination net, which meant they had a secondary communications channel the exercise umpires were not monitoring. Someone in that command post was being careful. Cole filed this. A sentry on the south face smoked, not on a schedule, when the mood struck him, which was every 50 to 70 minutes and always in the same spot, tucked against the corner of a vehicle where the wind came from the northwest, and he felt, Cole could see in his body language, as though he was safe. The ember of the cigarette was visible without optics at 200 meters. With optics, it was a beacon. A man who smokes on post believes the darkness belongs to him. He is wrong. Cole watched the smoke habit through 4 cycles and noted 3 seconds from the moment the lighter appeared to the moment the ember reached full brightness. 3 seconds of predictable light in a predictable location at predictable intervals. This was not a flaw in the man's character. It was information. At 0106 hours, Beaumont tapped Cole's ankle twice. Light. Quick. Cole did not move his head. His eyes shifted in the direction Beaumont's tap indicated, north-northeast. A figure moving slow, not a patrol sweep. Something more deliberate. Lower to the ground than a standard patrol posture. Moving along the depression line in a way that suggested the person knew the depression was there. Cole watched. The figure stopped 30 meters out, crouched, touched the ground with one hand, a tracker. Doing what trackers do, which is reading the language the earth writes in weight and moisture and the compression of grass stems that have been disturbed and have not yet recovered their original angle. Cole did not breathe. Beside him, Reyes registered the threat. The boy's body tightened in that particular way that human bodies tighten when the fight-or-flight system receives its first real activation. Not the mild stress of waiting, the acute stress of proximity. Cole moved 2 fingers to Reyes's wrist. Not a signal, just contact. The way you put a hand on a dog's collar, not to restrain it, but to let it know you are there and you are calm, and calm is the correct response. Reyes's pulse was fast. Cole pressed 2 fingers against the inside of his wrist, where the radial artery runs close to the surface. Something happens when a person in high arousal feels measured, deliberate pressure on a pulse point. The body reads it as information. The information says, someone is here who is not afraid, and they are in contact with you, and they are not alarmed. The nervous system takes its cues from the environment, reads the environment through the other body, and finds it calm. Reyes' pulse slowed. Incrementally, but it slowed. The figure outside crouched for a long moment. Then it stood, turned slightly, raised a radio. The transmission was too low to hear at this distance, but Cole heard the click of the handset being released after the message. Then the figure moved back toward the perimeter. Cole waited. 2 minutes? 4? 7? No response. No additional movement. No lights. He filed the figure the way he filed everything, in a mental ledger organized by observation, implication, and unknown. The unknown column for this entry held one large item. The figure had crouched exactly where the depression Cole's team occupied began to shallow out, had touched the ground there, had stood and reported. The report had not produced a response, which meant either the report was negative, the figure had found nothing and said so, or the figure had found something and said nothing. Cole did not know which. Both possibilities required the same response. Stay still, stay quiet, stay present. He looked at the command post, looked at the sentry's cigarette spot, looked at the radio check position. He had what he had come for: pattern of life, sentry habits, rotation intervals, secondary communications. A tracker who moved well in low ground. He had enough. He gave no order to withdraw. 02:48 hours. The Louisiana night had thickened. Not fog, but something close to it. The particular atmospheric weight that comes when the air is so saturated with moisture that the boundary between air and water loses meaning. It was warm. It had been warm since they had gone to ground. It would stay warm. The night did not cool here the way it cooled in Wyoming, where Cole had grown up, where the temperature could drop 40 degrees between noon and midnight, and the cold was a physical thing with weight and intention. Here the night just pressed. Rays had been still for 3 hours without complaint. Not the stillness of a man at rest, but the deliberate compressed stillness of controlled will, the kind that costs something on the front end and pays dividends when it matters. Cole had been monitoring him peripherally, the way experienced men monitor the inexperienced in the field, reading the 1,000 small signals the body sends when it is reaching a limit. Reyes was not sending those signals. Cole marked this and filed it. 03:12 hours. The tracker appeared again, this time from the northeast instead of the north, coming along the edge of the depression from an angle that added 15 degrees to the previous approach. Cole registered this immediately because it was not consistent with a patrol route. This approach was exploratory. The figure was not checking a grid, it was following something. It moved to within 22 feet. Cole became the ground, not metaphorically. This is a technique. It requires a complete withdrawal of intention from the body, not relaxation, not going limp, something more fundamental. The body remains ready, but the projection that human bodies make into the world, the forward lean of a living thing that wants something, that exists for purposes, that is going toward or away from something, that projection is withdrawn. The body stops advertising its aliveness. Animals know this, prey animals particularly. Cole had watched enough elk in the hills around Thermopolis to understand that an animal standing in the open can remain invisible simply by ceasing to be interested in anything. Interest is visible. Intention is visible. A living thing with no current intention is surprisingly difficult to see, even in good light. This was bad light. The tracker was 12 feet away. He stopped, crouched, looked directly at the depression where Cole and Reyes lay. Cole looked back, not with his eyes directed at the man, with his peripheral vision, which is more sensitive to contrast and motion than direct vision, and which does not produce the faint muscular adjustment that a direct gaze produces in the face of a person who is looking at you. The tracker was still for a long time, longer than a patrol check required. He was thinking. He was seeing something in the ground in front of him that was producing a question he was working out the answer to. He raised his radio. The handset keyed, released, 3 seconds. A response came, low, too low to hear. The tracker stood. He looked at the depression for 2 more seconds. Then he spoke into the handset again. Cole heard the words this time, close enough that the night and the man's volume aligned in his favor. Sector clear. He walked away. Cole lay still for 4 more minutes. Then he allowed himself one breath, long and measured, the kind of breath that serves as punctuation. The tracker had been good enough to find the edge of the depression, good enough to know something was wrong with what he was seeing, good enough to report twice. And then he had reported the sector clear. Cole did not know why. The not knowing sat in his chest with a particular weight. He filed it in the ledger under unknown and watched the command post breathe. The radio frequency was what triggered it. 03:34 hours. Cole reached into his kit for the pencil stub he kept for field notes. He wasn't going to write anything. He just wanted to feel the weight of it, the habit, the thing his hand reached for when his mind was working hard on something it could not yet resolve. His fingers found the pencil and the texture of it, the particular roughness of hexagonal graphite smudged wood, opened a door he had not chosen to open. 3 years ago, Fallujah. A different radio on a different frequency, and Cole lying still in different rubble, and the frequency had a fault, a recurring crackle on the 3-second mark, and a man named Sergeant First Class David Hale had told him about it before they went in, had said the comms on that frequency always crackle at 3 seconds, so don't let it spook you. David Hale was on the memorial wall at Fort Bragg. So were 2 others, Morrison and Tate, 3 names. One night when the crackle at 3 seconds had not been the radio fault, but had been something else entirely, and Cole had not moved when he should have moved, or had moved when he should not have. The calculus of that night still unresolved after 3 years of carrying it. He had learned from it. That was the honest accounting. He had learned from it and had built something better than he had before. A more patient animal, a more careful man. But the learning had a cost, and the cost had names, and the names were on a wall. He lay in the Louisiana darkness with the pencil in his hand. He looked at Reyes beside him, visible only as a shape, a controlled breathing, a hand flat against the earth. He thought, not this time. Not because he was better now than he was then, because he understood the ground better, because he had 3 years of learning the difference between patience and hesitation. And tonight he was not hesitating. Tonight he was choosing. Every moment of stillness was a choice, not a failure to act, and that distinction was everything. He put the pencil back. He pressed one finger to the coordinates on the back of his hand, feeling the indentations there, and he stayed in the ground and watched the command post breathe. At 0409 hours, a different patrol came through the sector. 4 Rangers, disciplined, good spacing, scanning arcs overlapping. Professional men doing professional work. They moved through the space 8 feet above where Cole and his team lay pressed into the earth. Cole listened to them breathe, listened to the sound of their gear, the particular frequency of a radio handset on a duty belt, the sound of a boot on pine duff versus a boot on packed clay. He listened until their sounds had diminished to nothing, and the night was back to its own frequencies. Insects, the distant sound of a generator. A great horned owl 200 meters southeast working a hunting lane in the pines. He had been told this mission was standard recon and report. He did not believe this. The 3 positions were not enemy objectives. They were questions. Someone had put questions on a map and sent 4 men into the dark to find the answers, and had torn out the page that would have explained why. Reyes shifted slightly beside him, a micro-adjustment of weight, completely silent. Cole noticed. 3 hours ago, that adjustment would have been audible. Now it was not. He noted it, filed it, said nothing. He looked at the command post, at the sleeping structure and the watchful sentries and the unknown of the tracker who had cleared a sector he should not have cleared. He made a decision. At 0521 hours, when he would have enough light to begin navigation and enough darkness remaining for cover, he was going to do something that was not in the mission brief. He was going to go deeper. 0521 hours. Team. The word was barely air, but they were close enough and trained enough that all 3 heads oriented to him. Mission objectives are documented. A pause. We're going to the 2nd position. Reyes processed this, then quietly. Sergeant, mission brief said recon and report. We have the report. The brief's objectives are complete. Cole held up his hand, the coordinates just barely visible in the very first gray suggestions of pre-dawn beginning to gather somewhere above the canopy. These are different objectives. Reyes looked at the hand. Those aren't briefed. No. So they're not the mission. Cole turned and looked at him for a moment. In the low darkness, Reyes's face was all large eyes and controlled youth, the particular expression of a man working out the gap between what he was told the rules were and what the rules actually are. Reyes. Cole's voice was a low, flat line. Someone tore a page out of a folder before they gave it to me. Think about what that means. Reyes thought about it. Cole watched him think. Then Reyes turned forward again and said nothing more. The 4 men began to move, not away from the perimeter, deeper. Behind them, the Louisiana night was doing what nights do, giving way with neither drama nor ceremony to the gray that comes before light, the uncertain hour when darkness is no longer itself and light has not yet committed to anything. In the command post, a sentry took up position at the south corner and produced a cigarette from his left breast pocket and turned his back to the wind the way he always did. No one in the command post knew that 4 men had just decided to stay. No one in the command post knew about the coordinates pressed into the back of a hand. No one in the command post knew what was at the second position or the third. Only one man knew, and he was moving through the dead ground with three others. And he knew because someone had trusted him to find it without being told where to look or why. He was going to find out if that trust was correctly placed. The trees took them. The night for a few more minutes held. Dawn at JRT's does not arrive the way dawn arrives in other places. It does not come from the east with any particular drama or intention. It seeps, it bleeds through the canopy of longleaf pine the way water bleeds through canvas, slowly and then all at once. And what was total darkness becomes gray, and what was gray becomes 100 different shades of green and brown that have been there all night waiting to be seen. Cole moved through the seeping light with his team in a loose column, 4 meters between each man, just enough that a single burst of fire could not touch all of them, and just close enough that a hand signal was visible. They moved along the drainage channel that Park had identified the night before, the ground soft and wet under them, the brush thick enough to slow a careless man, but not a careful one. And they were careful the way mountains are careful, which is to say they were not careful at all in the way humans mean it. They were simply doing what they were, which was moving through terrain as though terrain was their medium and not their obstacle. Cole led, Beaumont walked second, Reyes third, Park last, walking at an angle to the column, not directly behind Reyes but offset 2 meters right, watching the arc behind and to the flank that no one at the head of a column ever thinks about, because when you are leading, you are thinking forward, and the world behind you feels like something you have already survived. This is how most people get killed in the field, by the world they have already survived. The second coordinate sat 1,340 meters northeast of the main Ranger command post. Cole had worked out the rough approach during the night, matching the coordinate to what he knew of the terrain from map study before the exercise began and from what Park had reported about the drainage channel. The channel ran in the right general direction for the first 800 meters. After that, the terrain opened into a patch of mixed hardwood and pine that the map suggested was slightly higher ground, a low ridge running east-west. Nothing dramatic, the kind of feature that gets ignored in planning because it offers no obvious tactical value to either side. Cole thought about that. Features that offer no obvious tactical value to either side are often the most valuable features on a battlefield. He thought about the colonel with no name tape. He thought about the torn page. He thought about someone deciding at some level above this exercise and below the level where decisions get officially documented that a question needed to be answered. A question that could only be answered by men who move through ground the way ground moves without announcing themselves. He thought about what the question might be. At 0614 hours, Beaumont stopped. The column stopped with him. Each man going to one knee in the same motion, automatic. The body doing what training has made automatic, so the mind can do what training cannot, which is think. Beaumont did not look back. He looked at the ground to his left, at a specific patch of earth where the grass was slightly compressed in a way that had nothing to do with the drainage channel or the natural passage of animals. He studied it for 4 seconds. Then he looked up and scanned the tree line 20 meters ahead. Cole moved forward to him, low and quiet. Beaumont pointed at the compressed grass. Then he held up 2 fingers. Then he pointed northeast. Then he touched his watch. 2 men came through here, going northeast, sometime in the last 2 hours. Cole looked at the compression. It was subtle, the kind of thing a man would walk over and dismiss as animal sign. It was not animal sign. The stride interval was wrong for an animal, and the depth distribution was wrong for anything but a bipedal creature of roughly 200 pounds carrying gear. Beaumont touched his ear, then held up 1 finger. Listen, one more thing. Cole listened. Somewhere northeast, faint, was the sound of a generator that had not been on the map. Not the generator from the main command post, which ran on a different frequency, lower and steadier. This was a smaller unit, a tactical generator, the kind used to power communications equipment at a forward element. Cole held very still. A forward element at his second coordinate, the locked room was beginning to have a shape. Colonel Ray Decker had not slept. This was not unusual for him during a field exercise. Sleep during exercises was something junior officers did and senior officers scheduled. Decker scheduled it in blocks, with contingencies, with the understanding that the contingency would fire and the block would not happen. It usually did not happen. He stood at the map board in the main operations room and drank coffee that had been hot 2 hours ago and was now the temperature of mild disappointment. He looked at the three sectors his patrol teams had swept since 0200, and he thought about what they had found, which was nothing, and what that meant. Nothing meant something. He had spent 22 years learning the difference between a sector that is clear because no threat exists in it, and a sector that is clear because the threat in it is better than your detection capability. The difference cannot always be articulated. It lives in the part of the brain that evolved before language, the part that processes patterns below conscious threshold, the part that sometimes wakes you up in the middle of a quiet night because it has noticed something your conscious mind is still sleeping through. His subconscious had been awake since midnight. He looked at Howell's reports. 2 reports from the same general area, both negative. Howell did not file false negatives. Decker had worked with him for 3 years, and Howell did not file false negatives. If Howell reported clear, the sector was clear, unless the sector contained something that Howell's standard was insufficient for. Decker set down his coffee. He had requested the offer team's unit designation when the exercise was briefed. He had been given a reference number. When he ran the reference number through the coordination channels, he received a response that said the information was not available at his clearance level. His clearance level was not low. He looked at the map. He thought about what kind of unit receives a reference number that sits above a colonel's clearance. He thought about the exercise tasking, which had been framed as a standard opposing force problem. Find the OPFOR, demonstrate perimeter integrity, document the attempt. He thought about the word standard and how much work it was doing in that sentence. He called his executive officer over. Change the patrol intervals, he said. Randomize them, no pattern. And I want Howell repositioned to the east sector before 700. Any change to the alert status? Yes. He picked up his coffee. Tell the men they're being watched right now. Not might be, are. I want them to feel it. He walked to the window and looked out at the Louisiana morning, assembling itself in the trees. Somewhere out there, someone was better at this than he expected. He found to his mild surprise that this did not anger him. It interested him. The first power of the morning happened at 0638 hours in a way that Reyes would not fully understand until much later. Cole stopped the column at the edge of the hardwood section, at the point where the drainage channel shallowed and the low ridge became visible as a slight change in the way the trees were lit. He looked at the terrain for 2 minutes without moving. Then he lay flat and looked at it again from ground level. Then he stood and said to Reyes quietly, "What do you see?" Reyes looked. He saw trees. He saw the ridge, low and unremarkable. He saw open ground between the channel and the first trees of the hardwood stand, maybe 40 meters of mixed grass and scrub brush, the kind of gap that a man crossing in daylight would cross quickly and feel exposed during. Open ground, Reyes said. 40 meters, we'd be visible crossing. From where? Reyes looked at the probable observation points. The ridge, the higher trees. From the ridge, anyone on high ground. Lie down. Reyes lay flat. From the ground, the open space was not open. From the ground, there was a consistent depression running across it, 6 inches deep, not visible from standing height, running at a slight diagonal that crossed the open space in a way that, if a man moved along it while remaining below 6 inches in height relative to the surrounding terrain, he would be below the line of sight from the ridge during approximately 31 of the 40 meters. Do you see it? Cole asked. A pause, then the dip. Dead ground, 6 inches, 31 meters of it. Cole crouched beside him. To a standing man, that gap is a problem. To a man who understands what the ground offers, it's a road. He moved across the open space in less than 4 minutes, staying below the depression line with the fluid economy of a man who has done this so many times that the judgment of where the ground permits and where it does not has become automatic. He did not rush. He moved the way water moves through the lowest available channel, finding the path of least visibility, the way water finds the path of least resistance. He arrived at the first trees of the hardwood stand without any standing observer on the ridge, having a clean angle on him for more than 9 meters of the crossing. He looked back at his team. Beaumont came next, same motion, same economy. Park came after, and if anything, Park's crossing was slightly faster, his reading of the depression line slightly more precise, because Park had an engineer's eye for the geometry of concealment. Reyes came last. He was halfway across when he made a small error, a fractional misjudgment of the depression's angle, and for 3 seconds he rose 2 inches higher than he should have. On a training exercise in Louisiana, this should have been unremarkable. From the ridge, Sergeant First Class Marcus Howell was watching. He had been repositioned there at 0648 hours per Decker's order, 22 minutes ahead of schedule, which was why no one had accounted for him in the planning, because no one had known the repositioning order would come. He had a spotting scope and the patience of a man who grew up sitting in blinds before dawn in the Texas Hill Country, waiting for animals that could hear a heartbeat from 50 meters. He saw the 2-inch rise. He tracked it for 3 seconds. Then it was gone, back below the depression line, moving forward and vanishing into the hardwood stand. He stayed very still on the ridge. He had seen something. The depression was real, and he could see it now that he knew to look for it, a 6-inch fold in the ground that ran at a diagonal across the open space, invisible from below the ridge because of the angle. Whatever had crossed that depression had used it with intention. He raised his radio. Decker answered on the second click. Howell described what he had seen. 2 inches, 3 seconds. Hardwood stand, east approach. Decker said, "How many?" "At least one, possibly more. The depression would have covered the others completely if they were using it correctly." A pause. "They were using it," Decker said, not a question. "The one I saw was using it. The others I didn't see, which means they were using it better." Howell said nothing because there was nothing to say. Decker said, "Don't move, don't signal, don't change anything. Watch the hardwood stand and tell me what comes out the other side." The radio went quiet. Howell settled the spotting scope and breathed at the rate he had trained himself to breathe, slower than resting and completely steady, and watched the hardwood stand with the focused patience of a man who understood that what he was looking at was not a gap in a tree line, but a question about to be answered. Inside the hardwood stand, Cole had found the second coordinate. He had not announced it. He had moved to within 40 meters of it and stopped and looked, then looked at his team with an expression that conveyed without words that what lay ahead required a particular kind of attention. The second coordinate was a position, not an objective, not a structure, not a cache, a position in the military sense, which means a place where something has been placed with intention. The intention in this case was concealment. Whoever had put this here had chosen the location with a level of terrain analysis that Cole recognized as beyond standard. The position sat in the lowest available ground on the east side of the ridge, tucked into a natural fold where the hardwood roots had broken the surface and created a complex of shadow and dead space that no casual observer would associate with anything that mattered. It was covered with natural material, not camouflage netting, but actual branches and leaf litter in the arrangement that debris falls into when left to itself. 2 men were in the position. They had been there long enough that the ground around them had settled. They were armed with communications equipment, not weapons. One had a laser rangefinder, one had a notebook. They were both in uniform but without unit insignia of any kind. Cole looked at them for a long time from 40 meters. They did not know he was there. He looked at the communications equipment, at the notebook, at the laser rangefinder pointed east, toward a section of the training area that corresponded roughly to the direction of the third coordinate. He looked at the communications frequency on the visible handset display. He noted the orientation of the rangefinder and extended the line of sight in his mind across the terrain map he carried internally, and arrived at a point that was, within acceptable error, the third coordinate. He understood then what he was looking at, not who they were, not why they were there specifically, but the structure of the thing, the shape of what someone at a level above this exercise had built here, and why they had needed 4 men who moved through ground without being seen to find it. Someone had placed an isolated element at a position that an SF team could only reach by using terrain the way Cole's team used terrain. That was not an accident. It was a test within the test. And the element at the second coordinate, with its rangefinder pointed east and its notebook full of observations, was the proof of concept pointing toward whatever was at the third. He signaled the team to hold position and began a slow withdrawal into cover to think. Decker moved the briefing to 0900 hours in the main operations room. His company and platoon commanders stood around the map table with the postures of men who have been awake since before they wanted to be and are now being told something they did not expect. "We are being observed," Decker said. "Not searched for, not probed. Observed." He looked at the map. "The team outside this perimeter has been inside our security envelope for, at minimum, 12 hours, possibly longer." He let that sit. "They have documented our patrol intervals, our communications patterns, our sentry habits. They know this position better than some of the people in this room." Silence. Lieutenant Greer, late 20s, good instincts, said, "How do you know they're still here?" Because they haven't left. How do you know that? Because if they had left, Howell would not have seen movement at the eastern hardwood stand 40 minutes ago. Decker looked at Greer. They went deeper. They're not done. The room absorbed this. So they've already completed their mission objective, the XO said. Yes. Then why are they still here? Decker looked at the map. He had been thinking about this since before the briefing. Since the clearance gap when he tried to run the OP4's unit designation. Since the secondary communications channel that should not have been visible to anyone outside the post. Since Howell's 2 reports from the same area, both negative, in a sector where Decker's instinct said something was there. He said, because the exercise brief is not the full mission. The room was very quiet. They have an objective we weren't told about, Decker said, which means this exercise isn't testing whether we can find them. It's testing whether our OPSEC has the kind of holes that let a capable team do things we didn't know were possible. He looked at his XO. They came in here with coordinates we never gave them. They identified our secondary communications channel from outside the wire. They've been inside our security envelope for 12 hours, and we didn't know. He paused. That's not a training problem. That's a doctrine problem. Someone up the chain needed to see it demonstrated. The XO said carefully, if that's the case, our response is to continue the briefed mission. Our briefed mission, Decker said, is to demonstrate perimeter integrity. We have demonstrably failed. He said it without heat, with the flat acknowledgement of a man who prefers accurate information to comfortable information. The question now is whether we can turn that failure into something that teaches us something. He looked at the map. We're going to set a trap, not for the team, for the gap. He traced a route. They have to move from the second position to wherever the third position is. That movement crosses open terrain at the north end of the hardwood stand. We're going to have an asset there that looks like something worth investigating. He paused. And we're going to have people watching the approaches, not the obvious approaches, the dead ground. Howell, standing out of the back of the room, said quietly, they'll expect us to watch the dead ground now. Decker turned and looked at him. Yes, but knowing we're watching and knowing exactly where we're watching from are 2 different things. He looked back at the map. We're going to make them make a decision under time pressure. And when they make it, we're going to find out what they're actually made of. He picked up his radio. Move the reserve element to grid Lima 7. Tell them to be obvious about it. Not sloppy, obvious. There's a difference. I want the OPFOR to know the reserve is there. I want them to see it and think they found a gap we don't know about. Greer, and when they move for the gap, they won't. They'll know it's too visible. What they'll do is go around it. He tapped the map, and around it is here, where Howell is going to be, with 4 people in the dead ground, waiting. He looked at Howell. Howell nodded once. Best case, Decker said, we catch them and end this on our terms. Worst case, we learn how they move, and we're better for it. He looked at the room. Either way, we're not sitting here being studied anymore. We're doing the studying. He set the radio down. Move out. Cole saw the reserve element reposition at 10:14 hours. He was lying in the hardwood stand with Beaumont and Reyes, 50 meters from the second coordinate, watching the north end of the tree line, where the terrain opened into a long, flat approach that connected the hardwood stand to the rest of the training area. Park was not with them. Park had left at 09:18 hours. He had not asked permission. He had looked at the map Cole sketched in the dirt, at the third coordinate in the route between it and their current position, and had looked at the dead ground channel running east from the hardwood stand that no one in the exercise planning had assigned a tactical value to. He had looked at Cole with the expression of a man who has solved an equation that everyone else is still setting up. Cole had looked back. Park said, the East Channel. Nobody will be there. Cole said, you'll be alone. Park said, yes. A long pause. Cole looked at the East Channel. He looked at the third coordinate in the dirt sketch. He looked at Park, who had the stillness of a man who has already made a decision and is waiting for permission, not because he needs it, but because he respects the chain enough to ask. He thought about what Park was proposing. One man alone in terrain that no one was covering because no one had thought to cover it. No backup, no signal wire. 40 minutes through ugly ground with no team behind him and no way to know if the channel had been assigned to Howell's repositioning. He thought about the torn page. He thought about Calvin Park, who had spent 4 years building cellular networks in mountains and thought about dead space the way other men think about obstacles. who had walked the East Channel twice the first night because once was not enough to know whether the concealment was reliable. The man had already been in that channel. He already knew its shape. Cole said, "Report back at the third coordinate." Park moved into the East Channel without another word, and the brush took him, and he was gone. Now, watching the reserve element make its repositioning at the north end of the hardwood stand, Cole understood exactly what Decker was doing. The reserve was positioned to create a visible gap in the Ranger coverage, a lane that appeared unmonitored, that would draw a movement-starved op-for team toward it the way a gap in a fence draws cattle. The gap was real. The lane was genuinely open. A less experienced team might have taken it. The problem with the gap was 400 meters of open terrain to the third coordinate. 400 meters with the reserve element anchored at one end and whatever Decker had placed on the flanks that Cole could not yet see. Cole looked at the terrain to his east, at the drainage channel Park had gone into. He thought about Park saying nobody will be there. Park had been right about the East Route Channel the first night, right about its reliability, right about the reason it was reliable, which was that ugly ground is unglamorous and unglamorous options get dismissed. Probably right now too. Probably. The word bothered him. He had been operating on probably for 32 hours and probably had held. But probably is not the same as certainly, and the cost of being wrong was not a failed grade on an evaluation. It was Park, alone in a channel he had mapped, but not fully tested under current conditions. Cole looked at the reserve element sheets. Watched the body language of the soldiers. Watched the way they moved, confident and deliberate, covering the assigned sector with the thoroughness of men who believe they are the jaws of a trap closing. He watched for 90 seconds and found what he was looking for. He was not looking at the positions. He was looking at the intervals between them, at the specific geometry of a reserve element told to be obvious. Because men told to be obvious lean into it slightly, they create presence rather than just occupying space. And this rotation of focus, amplified across 7 men, opened a seam at the reserve element's left flank that was not visible from any angle except directly behind the leftmost soldier and low. 3 meters, maybe slightly less. Cole looked at the fallen loblolly pine in the shadow line of its root ball and the specific angle of approach that would put the root ball between his team and the reserve element's leftmost man for the first 22 meters of the crossing. 22 meters of cover, then 3 meters of seam, then into the terrain north of the tree stand where the ground broke into another drainage fold running northeast toward the third coordinate. He worked through it once, then again, then a third time from the perspective of a man standing at each of the reserve positions. The third check confirmed it. 3 meters. 11 seconds of exposure at standard movement pace. Less if you moved at the speed the terrain permitted. He signaled Beaumont, eyes acknowledged. He thought, let them believe the trap is working a little longer. The solo task happened at 0931 hours, and Reyes had not told Cole what it cost him. Cole had given him 90 minutes of observation work, monitoring the access route along the northern drainage ditch, while Cole and Beaumont repositioned to study the second coordinate from a different angle. The assignment required only stillness and attention and a Morse tap report through the signal wire strung to a light anchor point. At minute 41, the wire had gone silent, not the silence of a man reporting nothing. The silence of a man who had stopped tapping altogether. Cole had waited 4 minutes. Check tap, 2 clicks. Response pattern for alive in position was 3 clicks back. Silence. 3 more minutes, another check tap. Silence. Then at minute 53, the wire produced 6 clicks in rapid succession. Contact close, not moving. Cole exhaled. 12 minutes later, the wire resumed. And when Reyes came back at the 90-minute mark, his face was damp with sweat that was not from the Louisiana heat alone. A ranger sat down 2 feet from me to eat, he said. Stayed 23 minutes. Cole said nothing. Reyes said, I used the ground. Cole nodded and returned his attention to the hardwood stand, and that was the end of the conversation. But it was not the end of the thing. What Reyes had not said was what held him through those 23 minutes. Training gives you the knowledge of what to do. It does not give you the reason to do it when the cost is high. The reason had come from somewhere else. At minute 7 of the Rangers' lunch break, sitting 2 feet away, eating a sandwich that smelled in the Louisiana afternoon heat exactly like the sandwiches his father made on Saturday mornings in San Antonio, the ones with yellow mustard and processed cheese, and the cheap white bread with the red and yellow dots. Reyes had done the only thing available to him, which was to go somewhere his body could not follow. He went to a Saturday morning when he was 9 years old. His father at the kitchen counter, back turned, making 4 sandwiches for the road because he was leaving at noon for a 3-day run to El Paso and back. The particular set of his father's shoulders, white and slightly rounded from years behind a wheel, a shape Reyes associated more than any other shape with the idea of a man bearing something. The kitchen radio playing softly, the sound of the bread bag, the knife on the cutting board. His father had not turned around. He had said, to the counter, to the sandwiches, to no one in particular, "You will be fine out there. Not come home safe, not be careful. You will be fine." Reyes had been 9 and had not understood what this meant. Now he was 22, lying 2 feet from a man with a sandwich, understanding it completely. The way things are understood in the body, when the body is under sufficient pressure to cut through the distance between knowing and understanding. You will be fine. Not a prediction, a declaration, a thing willed into existence by a man who had spent his life carrying weight and knew that the only way to put it down was to decide it was possible. Reyes had put his hand flat on the ground, not for comfort, for the same reason his father had made that declaration to the counter, because the decision to be steady is a choice you make with your whole body, and the ground is the thing that receives it. The ranger finished his sandwich, stood, adjusted his rifle sling, walked away. Reyes tapped the wire 6 times and began counting minutes. Now at 10:47 hours, a second patrol moved through the hardwood stand. 7 men, disciplined spacing, good noise discipline, scanning arcs overlapping. They came within 30 feet of where Cole and Beaumont and Reyes lay behind the fallen loblolly pine. Cole watched the patrol move. He watched Reyes. At the moment the patrol's point man came closest, perhaps 18 feet away, crouching to look at a patch of disturbed earth that turned out to be a feral pig root, Reyes put his hand flat against the ground, not gripping, not pressing for reassurance, just flat, palm down. The point man stood, moved on. The patrol passed through and dissolved into the trees to the west. Cole looked at Reyes. Reyes was looking at the ground. Cole said nothing. He looked back at the north tree line, but he had seen it. It was 11:09 hours when Park's radio produced 3 clicks on the internal frequency. In position, no contact, waiting. Cole clicked back twice. Copy, hold. He thought about Decker. He had been thinking about Decker since the night before. The way you think about a chess opponent whose style you have identified but not fully mapped. Decker was good. Decker had built a perimeter that would have stopped most teams. Decker had placed Howell at the one position that offered a genuine chance at detection. Decker had changed patrol intervals when he sensed something was wrong. Decker was, by any reasonable standard, doing everything right. The problem was not that Decker was doing everything right. The problem was that doing everything right is only sufficient against opponents who are doing things you have planned for. Cole's team was not doing things Decker had planned for because they were not doing the things a team in their position was expected to do. They were not moving toward the obvious objective. They were not exploiting the visible gap. They were behaving like men who had all the time in the world, which was a kind of deception that no technical system could detect and no patrol rotation could counter. At 11:38 hours, Beaumont tapped Cole's foot. Cole looked left. Beaumont's eyes indicated the dead ground to the southeast. A narrow fold in the earth running parallel to the fallen pine they were positioned behind. 4 fingers pointed at the fold. 4 people in the southeast fold. Cole could not see them. That was the point. He could see the fold, which was empty to any normal examination. But Beaumont had read something in the ground, a compression pattern, a disturbance in the leaf litter at the fold's entry point, something that told him the fold was occupied. Cole thought for a moment. Then he understood. Decker had done the same thing Cole had done. He had looked at the dead ground and decided that dead ground was where a smart opponent would be and had put his best people there. 4 people in the southeast fold meant the gap to the north was bait and the dead ground to the southeast was the jaw. They were in the jaw. Cole lay still and thought about this without urgency. The jaw did not know they were there yet. That was the critical variable. Howell, or whoever was in the fold, had read the ground well enough to occupy the correct position, but had not yet read the ground well enough to find the specific depression that Cole's team was in. That could change. Cole looked at his watch, 1,141 hours. He thought about Park, already at the end of the East Channel, already at the 3rd coordinate, already waiting. He thought, the jaw is in the wrong place. He signaled Beaumont. 2 fingers pointed north, slight angle. The signal they had established for the movement pattern that used the fallen pine as a screen and came out the north end of the hardwood stand at the point exactly 11 meters left of where the reserve element's leftmost man was covering. 11 meters. In dead ground, 11 meters is a country. Beaumont's eyes acknowledged. Cole signaled Reyes. Reyes's eyes acknowledged. He clicked the radio once, the prearranged signal for park. It meant move. What happened in the next 22 minutes is difficult to describe. The way that things happening simultaneously are always difficult to describe, because a narrative is a line and what happened was not a line but a net. 4 separate threads pulling in separate directions at the same time, each dependent on the others, each invisible to the others. Cole moved north along the fallen pine, using the tree as a vertical screen between himself and the reserve element, staying in the shadow line of its root ball, reaching the north end of the hardwood stand at a point where the reserve element's coverage had a 3-meter seam between the third man and the fourth. Not a gap. 3 meters is not a gap. 3 meters is a momentary alignment of attention, a place where 2 overlapping arcs almost but not completely overlap, and in that almost is a human-sized absence. Cole went through it. He did not hurry. Hurry is visible. Hurry makes the ground shake in small ways that trained eyes detect. He moved at the speed that the terrain permitted, with the intention of someone who belongs in this space, because belonging is the thing you project when you are not afraid, and projecting belonging is the thing that makes you invisible to eyes searching for wrongness. He was through the seam in 40 seconds. Beaumont followed. 38 seconds. Reyes followed. Cole, from his new position north of the hardwood stand, did not watch Reyes cross. He was already looking forward, already reading the terrain between him and the third coordinate, already working out the dead ground. But he heard very faintly a change in the ambient sound behind him. Not a voice, not a radio, just the particular quality of silence that a group of people produce when one of them has seen something unexpected and the group has gone very still. Howell's team had seen something. Cole kept moving. At 12:03 hours inside the southeast fold, Sergeant First Class Marcus Howell was staring at the place where 3 men had been. He had seen them for approximately 4 seconds, not clearly, not with the certainty he would have needed to radio a confirmed contact. He had seen shapes in the shadow line of the fallen pine that resolved, when he refocused, into shapes consistent with the absence of men rather than their presence. He had not reported because he was not certain. Now he was looking at disturbed leaf litter at the north end of the fallen pine's root ball, a compression pattern in the moss that was 2 inches out of phase with the surrounding moss in a way that moss gets when something has rested on it for a long time and then been removed. They had been there. For how long, he could not determine from the sign. A long time. He radioed Decker. They were in the hardwood stand, southeast sector. They've moved north. Decker. Toward the reserve? Through it or past it. A pause. Sir, I think they went through the seam between positions 3 and 4. A long pause. 3 meters, Decker said. Yes, sir. They went through 3 meters. I believe so. Another pause. When Decker spoke again, his voice had the quality Howell had heard from him before, in training and in real places where the training was being tested. Not anger, a focused assessment, a recalibration happening in real time, a man adjusting his model of the world because the world had provided new data. The East Channel, Decker said. Do you have eyes on it? Howell turned. He looked at the drainage channel running east from the hardwood stand. The ugly ground, the thick brush, the wet and slow and unglamorous terrain. No, sir. Get eyes on it. He moved fast now, because fast was the appropriate response, because the ground belonged to someone else, and reclaiming it required a different tempo. He reached the east end of the drainage channel in 4 minutes. He looked at it. The brush had been disturbed, not dramatically. Subtly, the way brush is disturbed by something that knew it was going to be looked at and tried to leave as little evidence as possible. But Howell was good, and what he was looking at was the evidence of a man who was better than Howell had expected, but not better than Howell's eye. One set of sign, one man, moving east. Moving east toward whatever was at the end of the east channel. Moving east toward the third coordinate. Howell looked at the sign for a long moment. Then he said quietly to himself and to no one else, the thing that a tracker says when he finds the mark of someone who is very good at not being found. There you are. He radioed Decker. One man went east through the drainage channel. He's ahead of me by approximately 40 minutes. Decker's response was 3 seconds coming. Let him go. Howell blinked. Sir, let him go. There was something in Decker's voice that was not resignation and not defeat, but something adjacent to both. a thing that forms in a man's chest when he has been outmaneuvered by someone who understood the board better than he did and is large enough to acknowledge it. The East Channel comes out at grid Echo 4. I know what's at grid Echo 4. A pause. He knows what's there, too. That's why he sent one man ahead and brought the other three through the seam. Howell said nothing. They split us, Decker said. They put one man where we would focus and three men where we weren't looking. While we were watching the drainage channel, the other three went through the reserve. He was quiet for a moment. The drainage channel wasn't the route. It was the attention. Howell stood at the edge of the channel. Sir, he spoke slowly. The sign I'm reading. The man who went east. He moved along this channel before. The compression patterns are layered. He came through here last night and again this morning. A very long pause. He came through twice, Decker said. Yes, sir. He mapped it last night, used it this morning. Yes, sir. Decker's voice when it came was very quiet. How long have they been planning this? Howell looked at the drainage channel, at the layered sign, at the evidence of a man who had gone into ugly ground twice, not because he had to, but because ugly ground is a resource, if you understand it. Sir, Howell said, I think they planned it before the exercise started. Cole reached the third coordinate at 12:47 hours. Park was there. Park was sitting with his back against a tree, notebook open, with the relaxed alertness of a man who arrived early, has been waiting patiently, and has used the waiting time productively. He looked up at Cole when Cole came out of the low brush. He looked at Beaumont and Reyes behind him. He said, You went through the seam. Yes, I thought you would. He looked at his notebook. The reserve repositioned at 1014. The seam opened at 1019 when position 4 adjusted right to maintain contact with the reserve anchor. Cole looked at him. You calculated the seam from the drainage channel. From the east channel, I had a partial sightline to the reserve's left flank. Not complete. Enough to estimate the interval. Park paused. I estimated 3 meters. It was 3 meters. Park nodded as though this confirmed an acceptable margin of error. Cole looked at the third coordinate at the position that sat in the lowest available ground at the east end of the drainage channel, in a fold of terrain that appeared on no tactical map as anything worth noting. He looked at it for a long time. Then he crouched and picked up a piece of bark from the ground. He produced the pencil stub from his kit. He looked at the third coordinate, the indentations on his hand barely visible now, the pencil holding after 35 hours. He wrote on the piece of bark 5 words. He stood and walked to the center of the position and placed the piece of bark where it would be found by whoever came to this position next. He looked at it for a moment. Beaumont looked at it. Reyes read it. The 5 words were, We were here before you. Cole looked at his team, at Park, steady and precise, at Beaumont reading the surrounding terrain with the automatic attention of a man who is never fully off, at Reyes, who was looking at the piece of bark with an expression that Cole could not fully read, something between comprehension and wonder, the expression of a man who has just understood that the world he thought he was in is larger and more complicated and more interesting than the world he was told he was in. Cole picked up his radio. He keyed it twice on the exercise coordination frequency. The frequency the controllers monitored. The frequency that meant the exercise was speaking to itself. Then he said flat and clear, Exercise Phantom Fury, OP4 element. Third coordinate documented, 41 hours and 17 minutes. A pause. The controller's voice came back. Neutral, professional. OP4 element, copy. Standby for acknowledgement from Blue Force Command. Cole stood by. He thought about the torn page. He thought about the colonel with no name tape who had said find them right and had not said anything else. He thought about the JRTC training area, 700 square miles of Louisiana pine and swamp and ground that punished careless men, and about how much of that ground he and his team had moved through without being seen, and about one man who had been good enough to find the edge of the question, but not the answer. The radio clicked. Decker's voice. Not the controller. Decker himself. OP4 element. This is Blue Force Actual. A pause, shorter than it felt. All 3 positions confirmed? Confirmed. Another pause. Request face-to-face, Decker said. Grid Oscar 2, 1 hour. Cole looked at the piece of bark, at the 5 words. Copy, he said, 1 hour. He lowered the radio. He looked at Reyes. Reyes was looking at him with the expression of a man who has just realized he is at the end of something and the beginning of something else and does not yet know the name of either. Cole said, You put your hand on the ground when the patrol came through. Reyes looked at him. Yes. Why? A pause. The kind that means the answer is real. Because it held, Reyes said. Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his kit and started moving toward grid Oscar 2. Behind him, in the position at the third coordinate, the piece of bark sat in the Louisiana afternoon light with 5 words on it that someone would read in approximately 40 minutes. And those 5 words would produce a silence in that person that would last longer than the silence produced by most sentences of most lengths. We were here before you. But there was something else at that position that Cole had not placed there. Park had found it when he arrived, 40 minutes before the others. He had not said anything yet. He was waiting to see if Cole asked. Cole had not asked. Yet grid Oscar-2 was a flat clearing at the northern edge of the JTAC training area, where 2 dirt roads intersected and the longleaf pine gave way briefly to open sky. In better weather, it would have been unremarkable. In the particular late afternoon light of a Louisiana October, with the sun dropping at an angle that turned the pine tops amber and left the ground in a cool shadow that smelled of damp clay and old leaves, it had the quality of a place that has been chosen carefully. Not for comfort, for what it offered, which was sightlines in 4 directions and no dead ground within 200 meters. Cole noticed this and thought, Decker chose it for the same reason I would have. He arrived 7 minutes early with his team and put Beaumont on the north approach, Park on the east, and kept Reyes beside him, not because Reyes was needed for security, but because what was about to happen was something Reyes needed to see. Cole had decided this on the walk over without articulating the decision to himself. Some decisions are made below the level of language and are only recognized as decisions afterward. He stood in the clearing and waited. Decker arrived with 3 men at the hour mark. He came from the south road, which meant he had approached from the main command post, which was the direct route and the obvious route, and the route a man takes when he is not pretending anymore. His face was the face of a man who has spent 20 hours running a plan and has arrived at the plan's conclusion and found that the conclusion was not the one he had designed. He was not embarrassed. He was interested. Cole had expected embarrassment. He had prepared for the possibility of hostility, which sometimes lives on the other side of professional defeat. What he had not prepared for was the particular quality of focus Decker brought to the clearing. The attention of a man who has been given an expensive lesson and has decided the expense was worth it if the lesson was good enough. Decker stopped 4 feet from Cole, looked at him for a moment without speaking, the way 2 men look at each other when neither is sure which one is supposed to speak first, and both are deciding how much the other one knows. Then Decker said, "How long? Not how long were you in the perimeter, not how long did you observe us." The compression of the question into those 2 words meant he already understood the parameters. He wanted the number. Cole said 41 hours, 17 minutes. Decker looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked up. "Howell found your sign in the East Channel this morning. Layered. 2 separate passes." "He's good," Cole said. "He found it 12 hours after the second pass." Cole said nothing. 12 hours, Decker said again. Not as a complaint, as a measurement. The sound of a man calibrating against a standard he had not previously needed to account for. He looked at Cole's team, at Beaumont on the north tree line, standing easy, watching the approach with the quality of attention that does not look like attention because it has been practiced until it looks like nothing at all. At Park on the east, slightly offset from the obvious position, covering the angle the obvious position left open. At Reyes, standing beside Cole, young and still, and covered in the particular residue of a man who has been on the ground for 2 days. Decker looked at Reyes for a moment. At his age, which was not hidden by the dirt and the fatigue. At the way he stood, which was not the way an inexperienced man stands after 40 hours in the field, because an inexperienced man stands with relief when it is over. And Reyes was not standing with relief. He was standing with the particular alertness of a man who does not yet know it is over, whose body has not received that signal, who is still in it. Decker said to Cole quietly, "How old?" 22. Decker looked at Reyes for another second, then back at Cole. "Walk me through it." "All of it." "All of it." They walked. What happened at grid Oscar 2 was not the formal process. It was a conversation between professionals who had been in enough places where the formal process was a fiction imposed on chaos to know that the real exchange always happened outside the template, in the particular honesty that becomes possible when the result is already determined and nothing is left to protect. Cole walked Decker through the entry point, the first night in the Depression, the sentry habits, the patrol rotation. No notes. He carried it in the organized interior space his mind had built over years of putting information into terrain and retrieving it later. Flat declarative sentences. Evidence, not narrative. Decker walked beside him and listened without interrupting. His accompanying men fell back without being told. When Cole reached the sentry's smoking habit, Decker stopped. South corner. Yes. Same spot every time. 4 cycles, consistent within 3 minutes. I told him to vary his position. He varied the timing, not the position. The leeward corner against the vehicle is where the wind gives him cover. His body found it the first time and remembered. Decker nodded slowly. Comfort is a signature. Cole said nothing. He let Decker carry the weight of the sentence by himself because some lessons cost more if someone helps you carry them. They moved on. When Cole described the secondary communications frequency, Decker stopped again. You identified it. The radio operator stepped outside the northwest corner twice for better transmission. Second time, I had a partial angle on the handset display. We were running a separate coordination channel, administrative, but separate. He looked at Cole. We didn't think anyone outside the post knew about it. You didn't think anyone was close enough to see the display. No, we didn't. That's a different assumption. Something shifted in Decker's face. The adjustment of a mind filing new information in a category it did not previously have. Yes, he said, it is. They continued through the position, Cole walking him through the drainage channel approach, in the dead ground crossing, and the 6-inch depression that was 31 meters of invisible road across what had looked like open terrain. Decker crouched and looked at the depression from Cole's entry angle, from ground level, and saw it in a way that was, Cole could tell, the first time he had truly seen it despite having studied this training area for years. They were standing at the point where the depression's angle changed, where the last 9 meters before the hardwood stand required a degree of commitment to ground that most men found psychologically difficult. Because from the prone position you were effectively blind to your own flanks and had to trust that the dead space was doing the work the dead space was supposed to do. Park said, from slightly behind them, flat and without prelude, Sir, there was equipment at the 3rd position. Decker turned. Park said, communications equipment in a laser rangefinder, 2 men with a notebook, no insignia. The clearing was quiet for a moment. The longleaf pines moved slightly in a wind that had not been there a few minutes before. Decker said, what were they ranging? Park said, east, consistent with the access road running into the eastern training sector. He paused. The road that leads to the live fire facility. A longer silence. Cole watched Decker's face. He watched the colonel process this the way a man processes something he already knows at some level and is now receiving confirmation of. Not surprise. Recognition. The particular still quality of a mind that has been waiting for a specific piece of information without knowing it was waiting. Decker said, you weren't supposed to reach the 3rd position. Cole said, no. The exercise was designed so that the 3rd position was inside the response radius of the reserve element. If you found the 2nd position and attempted to reach the 3rd, the reserve would intercept. That was the scenario's designed outcome. Cole said, the reserve was watching the wrong ground. A very long pause. Yes, Decker said, it was. Park said quietly. The 2 men at the 3rd position. They had been there a long time. Ground sign consistent with 36 to 48 hours. He paused. They were there before the exercise began. Decker looked at Park, then at Cole. Cole said, the exercise wasn't designed to test whether we could penetrate the perimeter. Decker said nothing. The perimeter was incidental, Cole said. The test was whether we could locate and reach a position that the exercise scenario would not officially send us to, without intelligence support, without a briefed objective, using only what we could read from the terrain and what was on the torn-out page. He looked at his hand. The coordinates were almost gone now, the pencil worn to pale shadows in the skin, 41 hours dissolving into the body's own chemistry. The 2 men at the 3rd position, Cole said, they're not Rangers. Decker said, no, they're JTAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller. The men whose job is to be in the forward position, the isolated position, the position that is behind the front edge, and ahead of any supporting element, calling fires and directing aircraft and surviving in the space between forces where no one is supposed to be. The men who, when their position is compromised or their communications fail or their extraction is delayed, have to wait in the dark, in the ground, for someone who can move through terrain without being seen or heard or found, for someone who knows how to use dead ground. Decker said, they've been running an assessment. There's a new doctrine being evaluated for JTAC positioning in complex terrain environments. The question on the table at a level above this exercise is whether a small SF element can locate and establish contact with an isolated JT, ASAP position, using only terrain analysis and no electronic signature. He looked at Cole. The answer needed to be a field demonstration, not a theoretical exercise. Cole said, "So you didn't know?" Decker looked at him. "I knew there was an unbriefed objective. I didn't know what it was." A pause. "The colonel who briefed you?" "No name tape." "No." Decker looked at the ground again. "He does that." Cole thought about the folder, the torn page, the instruction, "Find them right." He thought about the 3 red circles on the map, the loose triangle they formed, the way they corresponded to no obvious tactical feature, and he understood now what the triangle was, which was not a tactical feature but a proof of concept. 3 positions that could only be reached in sequence by a team that moved through terrain the way his team moved, and the 3rd position, the JTAC element, was the demonstration that the sequence was real. He thought about the question that had been answered. He thought about why it needed to be answered in the field instead of in a briefing room. He thought about what it meant that the answer was yes. "How long have they been trying to get this answered?" he said. Decker said, 4 years. 4 years. Other teams, other exercises, other reserve elements that had functioned as designed and intercepted the OPFOR before the 3rd position, and a colonel with no name tape who had looked at those results and decided the exercise was solving the wrong problem. The variable was not the reserve. The variable was the team. Cole said, "The torn page. What about it?" "It was the coordinates for the 3rd position. You don't show a team the 3rd position if you expect them to stop at the 2nd. Decker looked at him for a long moment. "No, you don't." Cole looked at the faded marks on his hand. Someone had torn that page out because they were betting he would write the coordinates on his skin, not type them into a device, not memorize them abstractly. Write them on his body the way a man writes something he will need when everything else is gone. They were right. They walked back to the clearing at grid Oscar 2, and the formal part of the day began. Decker's XO had assembled a larger group while they walked. 2 platoon leaders, Howell, 6 Rangers who had been on the perimeter in the patrol rotations, the men who had looked for Cole's team and not found them, and who now stood in the clearing with the particular expression of professionals who have been shown a gap in their professional competence and are deciding what to do with the information. Howell stood apart from the others. He had arrived from the east, from the direction of the drainage channel, and he had the look of a man who has been thinking hard about something during a walk and has not yet resolved the thinking. Cole looked at him. Howell looked back. Cole said, "You cleared the sector twice." Howell said, "Yes. First time you weren't certain. Second time you were looking at the depression and you still cleared it." A pause that had weight in it. Howell said, "I saw the compression in the palmetto. I saw the ground temperature differential around the root ball. I saw 4 separate indicators that the depression was occupied." He looked at the ground, then back at Cole. "I cleared it because I could not believe that 4 people could hold that kind of stillness for the time period the sign indicated." Cole said nothing. "I have been doing this for 11 years, Howell said. "I have found every team I have been tasked to find. Every one." He said it without pride as a technical statement. "I could not make myself believe that 4 people were lying in a 6-inch depression 12 feet from me and I could not see them." Cole said, "What did you do with that?" "I reported clear because the alternative was to report a probable contact I could not confirm, which would have triggered a response that would have covered the sector, which would have caught you if I was right, but which would also have broken the exercise parameters if I was wrong." He paused. "I made a judgment call." Decker said from slightly behind, "It was the wrong call." Howell said, "Yes, sir, it was." Cole looked at Howell for a moment. Then he said, "What would have helped you see it?" Howell thought about this. The question was not rhetorical, and he treated it as what it was, a genuine technical inquiry from one practitioner to another. He said, "Knowing that the ground could hold 4 people who were that good at holding ground, I was calibrated against the best team I had ever encountered. This team was outside that calibration." He looked at Cole. "That's not an excuse. It's the explanation. You can only find what your reference set tells you is possible to find." Cole nodded once. The XO was looking at this exchange with the expression of a man watching something that is not in the after-action review template and trying to decide how to handle it. He did not interrupt. Decker asked Cole to demonstrate. This was not in the formal process either, but Decker asked it the way a man asks something he has thought about for a long time and has decided is more important than the process, which was directly, without apology, with the clear expectation that the answer would be yes. I want my men to see it, Decker said, not explained. Seen. Reyes was looking at Cole. Cole said, Reyes. Reyes looked up. Cole said, you're up. Reyes looked at him for a moment. Something moved through his face. A recognition, the particular expression of a man who understands that he is being handed something and has decided to take it with both hands. Decker looked at Cole. Cole said, you want to see it? You need to see it with the youngest man on the team. Decker said nothing, but his expression acknowledged the logic. Reyes turned to the eastern tree line. He looked at it for 30 seconds, the unhurried attention of a man reading something in a language he has just learned but already trusts. Then he walked into it. The rangers in the clearing watched him go. Decker looked at Cole. How long? Cole said, give him 8 minutes. Decker nodded to the XO. The XO checked his watch. The clearing was quiet. The pine tops moved in the wind. The generator ran. Somewhere to the north, a bird made a sound and then stopped. At 4 minutes, Decker said, he's 22. Cole said, yes. First exercise at this scale? Yes. Decker looked at the tree line. He went in there alone. Cole said, he went in there like he lives there. Decker was quiet for a moment. Then, how long did it take you to be able to do what he can do? Cole said, I grew up with it, Wyoming. It was already there. He paused. He's building it from scratch. That's harder. Decker said, better? Longer, Cole said. At 7 minutes and 40 seconds, the XO said, time. Decker raised his voice to the clearing. Reyes, show yourself. Nothing for 3 seconds. Then, from the edge of the tree line, 30 feet from where Reyes had entered, a figure stood up from the ground. Not from behind a tree, not from behind a bush. From the ground itself, from a shallow fold that ran along the tree line's edge at an angle that made it invisible from the clearing until something moved in it. He had not been in the tree line. He had been at the edge of it, 5 feet into the shadow, in a fold of earth that was not on any map and was not obvious to any standing observer, and he had moved from his entry point to that fold in the first 90 seconds, and then held it for the remaining 6 minutes, while the rangers in the clearing looked at the tree line and did not see him. He stood up. He looked at the clearing. He looked at the 40-odd men looking back at him. He did not look at Cole. Cole noticed this and thought, good, that was the right choice. The demonstration is not for me. Do not look at me. Reyes was looking at Decker. Decker looked back at him for a long moment. The silence in the clearing had a different texture now. Not the silence of men waiting for something to happen, but the silence of men who have just seen something happen that they will still be thinking about years later when they are trying to explain to younger men why certain things matter. Decker said to Reyes, how did you pick that fold? Reyes said, I looked where the ground was lower than everything around it. Then I looked at where the light stopped. They were the same place. Decker was quiet. Reyes said, dead ground. The two words sat in the clearing like something placed there with intention. Not said for effect, just the accurate name for what he had found, stated by a man who had earned the right to use it. Decker turned and looked at Cole. His face had the quality of a man who has been given the answer to a question he had been carrying for a long time and is not sure yet whether the answer is a relief or a new kind of weight. He said, walk me through the East Channel. Park said you sent him through alone. Cole said, he sent himself. Decker looked at Park. Park said, the channel was the better route. Cole needed the seam at the reserve's left flank. The seam required drawing attention to the north approach. The East Channel gave me a separate line that served both. He paused. I didn't ask because I knew the answer was yes. Decker looked at Park for a moment. You knew. Park said, he trusts the team to read the terrain. I read the terrain and reached the same conclusion he would have reached. Asking was a formality neither of us needed. A ranger lieutenant, Young, standing at the back of the group said, that's a violation of communication protocol. The clearing was very quiet for a moment. Cole looked at the lieutenant. The lieutenant was correct. Within the framework of standard operating procedure, Park's independent movement without a confirmed order was a breach. It was also the thing that had put Park at the third coordinate 40 minutes before Cole arrived, which was the thing that had allowed Park to document what was there and bring the documentation to the face-to-face. Cole said, communication protocol assumes the team shares a common operational picture, but not a common terrain read. When the terrain read is the same, protocol becomes an administrative overhead. He looked at the lieutenant. In a 40-hour observation exercise with no radio outside the team and ranger patrols in every sector, that overhead had a cost. The lieutenant said nothing more. Decker said, he's right. He said it to the lieutenant without looking at him. He's also right in a way that requires context. Write that distinction down. He looked at Cole. Both of you. The formal after-action review convened at 1700 hours. Cole's team did not attend. The exercise controllers had indicated the formal review was a Blue Force internal event and that OPFOR would run separately, two reports going up separate chains to whoever understood the full scope of what Phantom Fury had been designed to answer. Cole sat with his team on the step outside the operations building. The sky had gone from amber to the dark blue that lasts about 15 minutes before the first stars, the color that makes everything it touches look final. Beaumont was cleaning his boots. Not because the boots needed cleaning, because cleaning boots at the end of a hard day is a physical statement about the relationship between effort and maintenance, about how you treat the things that carry you. Park had his notebook open. He was not writing. He was looking at the pages he had already written, reviewing something, checking the coherence of a record kept the way an engineer keeps records, with the assumption that someone will need to verify the work later. Reyes was sitting with his back against the wall, knees up, eyes open, looking at the tree line across the clearing with the unfocused attention of a man who is at rest but not empty. His hands were in his lap. One of them was palm down on his thigh. Cole watched him, Reyes said without looking over. Who were the two men at the third position? Cole said, JTAC element. A pause. So the whole exercise, the perimeter, the patrols, the trap, that wasn't the actual objective. No, the actual objective was reaching them. Yes. Reyes looked at the tree line for a moment. Then, why didn't they just tell us that? Cole rubbed his thumb across the ghost of marks on his hand, the pencil surrendering now to the skin's own processes. Because if you know the objective is to reach a specific position, you approach it as a destination, he said. You take direct routes. You accept elevated risk to cover distance faster. You think about arrival. He paused. If you don't know the destination, you move through the terrain as itself. You read it as it is. You use what it offers because you have no other tool. He looked at Reyes. They needed to know if a team could reach that position using only terrain. Not intelligence. Not mission clarity. Terrain. Reyes said, and the torn page. Cole said, the torn page was a test inside the test. The coordinates were on that page. I wrote them on my skin instead of using them for navigation because I thought they were position coordinates, not route waypoints. He paused. That was my assumption. It happened to be the right assumption. It might not have been. Reyes said, you didn't know for certain. Not until we reached the second position and I could see what was there. Reyes was quiet for a moment, then, but you went anyway. Cole said, you go with what the terrain tells you. The terrain told me the three positions formed a sequence. Sequences have conclusions. You follow the sequence and you let the conclusion tell you what it is. Reyes looked at his own hands, at the one lying palm down on his thigh. He said, in the clearing, when you asked me to demonstrate, you said I was up before I asked. Cole said, yes. Why me? You could have done it faster. A long pause. Not because Cole did not know the answer, because the answer required being said correctly. Decker needed to see the youngest man on the team do it, Cole said, because the argument we were making is not about exceptional individuals. If it's about exceptional individuals, it answers the wrong question. The doctrine question is whether this skill can be trained into a team, not whether one experienced operator can demonstrate it on demand. He looked at Reyes. You are the evidence that it can be trained, not me. Reyes sat with this for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the photograph. Cole had seen him touch that pocket many times over the past 2 days, had never seen him take the photograph out. He looked at it now, the two of them sitting in the almost dark outside the operations building, with Beaumont working nearby, and Park reviewing his notes, and the Louisiana evening assembling itself around them, with its characteristic indifference to what the people in it had been through. It was a photograph of a man sitting in a truck, an older model, a working truck, and the man was behind the wheel with the window down and his arm resting on the door, and he was looking at something outside the frame with the expression of a man who is at a distance from wherever he is and is comfortable with that distance. Big shoulders, slightly rounded. The build of a man who has carried weight his whole life and stopped noticing it. Reyes looked at the photograph for a few seconds. Then he put it back in his pocket. He did not say anything about it. Cole did not ask. Beaumont looked up from the boots and then back down. The five of them sat in the Louisiana evening. 4 men who had been in the ground for 41 hours and 17 minutes, and 1 man who had walked through the space they occupied and reported the sector clear, and the evening came in around them with the patience that evenings have, which is the patience of something that does not need to announce itself because it will arrive regardless. After a while, Beaumont said without looking up, "What was in the notebook?" Park said, "Grid references, bearing readings, wind measurements, communication logs." He paused. They were tracking aircraft approaches to the eastern live fire range, timing them, recording the intervals. Cole looked at him. Park said, "They had been doing it for 36 hours. The notebook was almost full." He paused again. What they were recording, if it were a real position in real terrain, would be the information needed to call close air support for an element operating on the east side of the range with no line of sight communication to rear echelon. The quiet that followed was not the quiet of men who did not understand. It was the quiet of men who understood completely and were giving the understanding the space it needed. Beaumont set down the boot he had been working on. Reyes looked at the tree line. Park said, "They had been there 36 hours before we found them." He said it without emphasis as a fact, but the fact had a shape that filled the quiet around it. In a real scenario, if no one found them, they would have continued until their batteries failed, or their water ran out, or the window for the operation closed. He paused. In a real scenario, the people depending on the information in that notebook would not have gotten what they needed. Cole said, "But we found them." Park said, "Yes." Another quiet, different from the first one. The first quiet had been about the weight of what the situation meant. This quiet was about the simpler thing on the other side of that weight. They had found them. Decker appeared at the door of the operations building in its 1748 hours. He looked at the 4 of them on the step. He had a folder under his arm and the expression of a man who has been in a formal review process and is glad to be outside of it. He looked at Cole. Cole looked back. Decker said, "The formal report will say what it says." He opened the folder, glanced at a single sheet, put it back. "What it won't say, because formal reports don't have a field for it, is what I said in there to my officers." Cole waited. Decker said, "I told them we failed at the primary task because we were thinking about the wrong thing. We were thinking about detection, where the threat would come from, how to build coverage against movement." He looked at the tree line. "We should have been thinking about terrain, not our terrain, not the terrain as a problem for us, the terrain as a resource for whoever was trying to move through it." He paused. "We were defending against a team. They were using the ground. Those are different contests, and we entered the wrong one." Cole said, "You entered the one the exercise was designed to produce." Decker looked at him. "The exercise was designed to produce failure." Cole said, "The exercise was designed to produce a specific kind of failure that teaches a specific kind of lesson." He paused. "That's not the same thing as being set up." Decker looked at him for a moment, then he said, "The colonel is going to want a debrief from you." "I know. He'll have questions about the methodology, how you selected routes, how you maintained the team in position for that duration, what you used to track the sentry patterns." He paused. "He's going to want to know if this is replicable, if it can be trained into other teams." Cole looked at Reyes. Reyes was looking at the tree line. Cole said, "Tell him yes." Decker looked at Reyes, then back at Cole. "On the basis of one exercise." Cole said, "On the basis of a 22-year-old who had never done this before, who held position with a ranger 2 feet from him for 23 minutes, who found the fold in your clearing without being told where to look." He paused. "Tell him yes, right people, right approach, enough time. It's replicable." Decker said, "Howell wants to talk to you." Cole said, "I know." He stood. Beaumont had finished the boots. Park had closed the notebook. Reyes was still looking at the tree line with the expression Cole had been watching develop for 41 hours. A man who has found something in himself that he did not know was there and is still learning its name. Cole said, "Get some sleep. Debrief is 0600. He walked toward Howell. Howell was standing alone at the edge of the cleared area where the pine forest began. He had his hands in his pockets and he was looking at the transition from open ground to cover, at the specific point where a man crossing from the clearing into the trees would choose to step if he wanted the trees to take him quickly. Cole walked up beside him. They stood for a moment without speaking. 2 men who had been on opposite sides of the same problem for 41 hours and who had developed, through that opposition, a particular kind of mutual understanding that has no name but is instantly recognizable to anyone who has experienced it. Howell said, the second time I checked the depression, when I called sector clear. Cole said, yes. Howell said, I had 4 positive indicators: sign, temperature differential, compression pattern, and a 5th I didn't report. Cole waited. Howell said, the insects. The ground insects in the depression were displaced, not the vegetation. The insects, they had moved to the outer edge of the depression's perimeter in the pattern they use when a large, warm body occupies a space for an extended period. He paused. I have seen that pattern once before. On a training exercise in Germany, 1998. A German GSG-9 element. They were in a hide position for 60 hours. The insect displacement was the only sign that was readable. Cole said, but you cleared it. Howell said, I cleared it because I could not accept that 4 American soldiers would be in a depression 12 feet from me and I could not see them. The insect displacement was a 5th indicator, but it required a conclusion that my experience told me was not possible. He was quiet for a moment. I made my experience more important than the evidence. A long pause. Cole said, you found us at the East Channel this morning. Howell said, 12 hours late. Cole said, you found us. Howell said, the layering in the sign was unusual. 2 separate passes at different humidity levels. I could date the first pass to within a 4-hour window. That's when I understood the channel had been used for reconnaissance before the exercise element began. He paused. That's when I understood I was dealing with something I hadn't accounted for. Cole said, what did you do with that? Howell said, I told Decker. He said, let him go. He looked at the tree line. I understood why. The 3rd position was already documented. Changing the outcome at the channel wouldn't change what mattered. Cole said, it would have. Howell looked at him. Cole said, if you'd intercepted Park at the channel, you would have known how we moved. Not from the formal report, from standing in the channel with someone who had just come through it. He paused. Decker made the right call, but for a different reason than he gave you. Howell looked at him for a long moment. He nodded slowly the way a man nods when he is filing something in a category that will require significant reorganization. He said, the insects. Cole said, yes. Howell said, I should have trusted the insects. Cole said, you should have trusted that the evidence was telling you something your experience hadn't seen yet. He paused. Your experience is a reference, it's not a ceiling. Howell was quiet. Then he said carefully, can I ask you something? Cole said, yes. Howell said, at 0314 hours the first night, when I was 12 feet from the depression and I called sector clear. I know you were there. I want to know if you were certain I wouldn't find you. The pine forest moved in the evening wind. Somewhere in the training area, a vehicle engine started and ran and faded. Cole said, no. Howell looked at him. Cole said, I was certain you were good. I was not certain you were calibrated for what we were doing. Those are different things. He paused. I was betting that the gap between your calibration and our capability was enough. He looked at Howell. I was right, but it was a bet. Howell looked at the ground for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Cole shook it. No words after that. There were no words that would have improved on the handshake, which said what it said between 2 men who had been in the same dark and had read it differently, and who both understood now something about the dark that they had not fully understood before. Howell walked back toward the operations building. Cole stood at the edge of the tree line alone. He looked at his hand, at the place where the coordinates had been. The pencil had held for 41 hours and was now gone entirely, surrendered to the skin's own processes, to sweat and friction and time. The marks were invisible. The positions were not. They were in the organized interior space of his mind, where things that matter go and do not leave unless you tell them to. The 3 positions were there. The 2 men with the notebook were there. The torn page and the kernel with no name tape and the instruction to find them right were there. The depression at the bottom of the palmetto stand was there. The hand he had pressed to Reyes's wrist in the dark and the pulse slowing under 2 fingers, that was there. The fold at the edge of the tree line where Reyes had stood up in front of 40 Rangers and said dead ground, like it was a word he had always known, that was there. He turned back toward the operations building. In the east, above the pine canopy, the first stars were showing. Not many, just the first ones, the ones that arrive before the sky is fully dark enough for the others. The ones that are there whether you look for them or not. The ones that have been burning so long that the light reaching you now left the source before anyone alive had a name for what stars were. Cole looked at them for a moment. Then he walked back toward the light. Reyes was the last one awake that night. The team had been assigned a transient billet behind the operations center. 4 cots, a room that smelled like pine cleaner and institutional paint. Beaumont was asleep within 4 minutes. Park within 7. Cole lay longer, the field still in him, the slow decompression of a body returning from compressed to ordinary. Reyes lay on his cot and looked at the ceiling. He was not anxious. He was sitting with a question he did not have language for yet, a question about what had happened to him in 41 hours and what it meant about him. Not about the team, not about the mission, about him. He had been afraid, that was accurate, from the transport to Fort Polk through the first night in the Depression and every hour after. He had been afraid and he had not shown it, not because he suppressed it, because something else was running the show. He was still identifying what that something was. He thought about the Depression in the Palmetto stand, 6 inches of dead ground and the decision to trust it. He thought about the Ranger's sandwich 2 feet from his face and his father's kitchen on a Saturday morning, and the declaration that had crossed 12 years in 2 states to reach him at exactly the right moment. You will be fine. He thought about Cole's hand on his wrist at 0314 hours, the pulse slowing. Not a magic trick, a communication through the only channel available. The moment is survivable, the ground will hold. He thought about the fold at the clearing's tree line, how he had looked at 40 rangers and chosen not the tree line itself but its edge, where the shadow was deeper than any standing observer could calculate. The fold was there. He had read it. He had gotten into it. He had held it for 6 minutes. He reached into his pocket and held the photograph without taking it out. Big shoulders, the arm on the door, the expression of a man comfortable at a distance from wherever he is. You will be fine, not a promise, not a prediction, a choice, made out loud in the only moment available, by a man who had carried hard things long enough to know what was built for carrying and what was not, who had looked at his son and decided. Reyes put the photograph back. He turned on his side and closed his eyes. The room was quiet. Outside, the Louisiana night did what it does, which is exactly what it was doing 41 hours ago when 4 men went into it and became part of it. The night indifferent and permanent and full of dead ground that holds things the standing world cannot see. At 0600 the next morning, Cole received a message through the exercise coordination channel. Not from Decker, not from the controller, from a number with no registered name, a number that produced, when Cole looked at it, the specific recognition of a number he had seen once before on a form attached to his briefing request, a number that lived at a level of the organization where numbers do not get attached to names. The message was 4 words. Cole read it once. Then he set the phone down on the cot and sat with the 4 words for a moment. They were, find the next one. He looked at the phone for a long time. Then he picked up his kit and walked to the door. Outside, the Louisiana morning was beginning its daily process of becoming itself. The pine forest to the east was still dark, the canopy holding the night longer than the open sky above it. And in that darkness, the first birds were starting, the ones that begin before the light commits to anything. Cole looked east. He thought about the terrain. He thought about the 3 coordinates that had been on his hand and were gone now, and about the 4th one that did not yet exist, and about the colonel with no name tape who had already identified the ground where it would be, and about the team sleeping in the room behind him, and about 41 hours and 17 minutes and 6 inches of dead ground, and a 22-year-old from San Antonio who had put his hand on the earth and found that it held. He thought about dead ground, about how much of it there was in every terrain, in every theater, in every exercise, in every real place where the question mattered, about how most people would never know it was there. He turned and walked back inside to wake his team. The part that still gets me, Howell looked straight at them, 12 feet away, 5 separate indicators telling him something was wrong, and he cleared the sector anyway. Not because he was bad at his job, because he couldn't make himself believe 4 men could disappear into 6 inches of ground and be completely invisible. That gap between what the evidence says and what experience allows you to believe, that's where Cole's team lived for 41 hours. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something was there, but couldn't trust what you were seeing? Drop it below. And if stories like this are your thing, there's more where this came from.